Narendra Modi stood quietly at the edge of the stage, his hands folded, his eyes searching the packed hall of students, scientists, and entrepreneurs. The auditorium in Delhi was filled to the last row. Bright lights shone from above, but none of them could shine brighter than the calm, graceful woman walking up to the microphone. She was small in height, her sari simple and plain, but her voice was strong. Her name was Lakshmi Pichai, the mother of the Google CEO, Sundar Pichai. Few knew her by name before this day, but today, the world was about to listen. It all began with a quiet invitation from the Prime Minister's office. Sundar had flown in from Silicon Valley, invited to speak at India's Innovation Summit. He was to share his journey, his challenges, his vision for young minds. And, as a surprise guest, he had brought someone the country rarely saw: his mother. First, the audience expected the usual praise, a mother proud of her son's success, stories of childhood, lessons, dreams. But what came next turned everything upside down. Lakshmi stepped to the microphone. She looked at the crowd, then at the Prime Minister. "Thank you," she said softly. "But today I don't want to talk about Sundar. I want to talk about what built him, and that is not America. It is India." The room fell silent, even Sundar, who stood beside her, looked confused for a second, but he knew his mother well. She always had a reason, always had something deeper to share. "When Sundar was young," she began, "we had no refrigerator, no television, no car. We had one ceiling fan, and every time it stopped, he would ask me why. I told him, electricity is like people. It flows when it is respected. When ignored, it disappears." There was a soft murmur in the audience, but India did not ignore us. She continued, "India gave us books. India gave us teachers who stayed late without pay. India gave us neighbors who shared food, who told stories, who gave us courage. And when Sundar left for America, he did not leave India behind. He carried it in his mind and in his heart." She paused. "So when you ask me where Sundar's strength came from," she said, her eyes now fixed on Modi, "I will tell you, it came from watching me walk to the market every day in the heat. It came from my husband fixing wires late into the night to pay for school. It came from a country that taught us how to live with dignity, even when we had nothing." Modi's smile faded slightly. He was not angry. He was listening, deeply, as if each word peeled away a layer of silence that had built up over years. "But today," Lakshmi said, her voice shaking just a little, I worry we are forgetting these small truths. We talk about big numbers, big dreams, but we forget the woman in the village who teaches her daughter math without even finishing school herself. We forget the man who builds his son's computer from spare parts because he can't afford a new one. These people are India's true strength." The crowd had stopped shifting. Phones were lowered. Heads were still. Lakshmi turned back to the audience. "I am not here to impress you," she said. "I am here to remind you." And then she stepped back. The applause did not come right away. There was a moment, a heavy, honest moment where everyone just breathed. And then it exploded. Not the loud, excited clapping of a tech announcement, but a long, emotional response from people who had just remembered something important. Backstage, Sundar wiped his eyes. He had spoken at Harvard, MIT, and the United Nations. But never had he felt so proud or so humbled. A few steps away, Modi remained quiet. He did not clap immediately. He looked down for a few seconds, and when he looked up again, his face had changed. Something had shifted. The man who had led a nation had just been reminded of the people who held it up that evening. The clip of Lakshmi Pichai's speech went viral across India. Not because it was flashy, not because it was controversial, but because it was real. And that night, in a quiet hotel room in Delhi, Sundar asked his mother why she said those things, why she looked the Prime Minister in the eye. Lakshmi smiled. "Because even the most powerful men," she said. Sometimes forget the strength of the quiet ones. And Sundar understood. He had spent his life building tools for the world, but his mother had just reminded him why those tools mattered, and the world would remember her words. Because sometimes, truth needs no title, it only needs a voice. The next morning, before the sun rose over Delhi, Sundar sat quietly at the window of his hotel room. The city was still asleep, but his mind was wide awake. His mother's words from the previous night echoed in his thoughts like an unfinished song. He had heard many speeches in his life, but this was different. It didn't talk about technology or ambition. It talked about roots, about quiet people, about pain and dignity. And now, something inside him was shifting as dawn broke. Sundar turned to his mother, who sat sipping tea near the window. "Amma," he said softly, "why now? Why speak about those things now?" Lakshmi looked at him with that same calm strength she always had. "Because they forget, Kanna," she replied, "and if you don't remind them, who will?" Just then, his phone buzzed. Dozens of missed calls. Media outlets, government representatives, tech leaders. Everyone wanted a word. But one message caught his eye. It was a short invitation from the Prime Minister's office. "Modi ji would like to meet you and your mother privately this evening." That sentence alone made the air feel heavier by the time they arrived at the official residence that evening. The sun had dipped low. The guards at the gate didn't salute like usual. They greeted them with quiet respect. Something had changed in the atmosphere. Inside, Modi welcomed them with folded hands. His expression was serious, but warm. "Lakshmi ji," he said, "your words yesterday, they shook me." Lakshmi bowed her head slightly. Modi continued, "I have met presidents, kings, and inventors, but rarely have I heard truth spoken so simply. You reminded me of something I had not felt in years." He then turned to Sundar. "And you, young man?" he said. "Your journey is remarkable, but I now understand what made it possible." Sundar smiled politely, but he remained silent. Something told him his mother still had more to say. After some quiet moments, Modi spoke again, but this time, his voice was more personal. "May I ask something?" he said. Lakshmi nodded. "When Sundar left for America, did you ever doubt he would make it?" Lakshmi closed her eyes for a second, and then a surprising answer came. "Yes," she said. "I doubted." Even Sundar turned to her, surprised. "I doubted," she repeated, "because he was too kind, and I feared the world would break that kindness. In our village, being soft is often mistaken for weakness, but Sundar was never weak. He just refused to fight with anger." She paused. "I once told him, if someone closes a door, find a window, but never break the door. And that is how he lived." Modi leaned back in his chair. His eyes didn't blink for several seconds. He seemed to be seeing something far away, maybe something from his own youth. After a long silence, he whispered, "My mother would have liked you." Then, breaking protocol, he stood and walked over to Lakshmi. Slowly, gently, he touched her feet. "For reminding me of India's soul," he said quietly. Lakshmi gently touched his head and whispered, "Do not forget again." The room stood still. Outside, Delhi moved on. Traffic honked, people rushed. The night continued as if nothing had changed. But inside that room, history had shifted not through laws or speeches, but through a mother's voice and a prime minister's. Silence. On the way back, Sundar sat in the car beside his mother, his thoughts racing. She had just said something that surprised even him. "You doubted me, Oma?" he asked, not hurt, just curious. Lakshmi smiled again. "Not your heart," she said, "just the world around you. But I prayed your kindness would survive." And Sundar understood. He remembered the long nights of studying by candlelight, the afternoons fixing radios with his father, the mornings when his mother packed food even when there wasn't enough. And most of all, he remembered the day he first saw a computer at a railway office, and how his fingers trembled when he touched the keyboard. He didn't just survive the world, he brought his gentleness into it. But as they returned to the hotel, another thought crept into Sundar's mind. Something his mother had never told him. "Oma," he asked, "why did you never visit my office in California? Not once in all these years." Lakshmi looked away. The lights of the city danced across her face. "Because there is something I never told you," she said softly. Sundar waited. "Before you left for America," she said, "I received a letter." He frowned. "What letter?" But she didn't answer right away. She closed her eyes, as if gathering something heavy from deep inside. "The letter said you were accepted," she said. "But it also said you would not be funded. You needed $20,000. We didn't have even two." Sundar's heart dropped. He had never known this. "But when you received your letter," Lakshmi continued, "it said you had full scholarship. Someone changed their mind. Someone helped. But to this day, I don't know who. All I know is that the night before, I went to the temple, and I cried." Sundar was silent. His journey, everything he had built, almost never happened, and he had no idea. A quiet twist from the past had changed everything, and now, he needed to know more. That night, he could not sleep. He searched old emails, old files, names of professors, sponsors. Nothing. It was like a missing piece of his life had been quietly erased. But one thing was clear, his journey was never his alone, and in the days ahead, Sundar would go on a search, not just for the unknown donor, but for something deeper. A story buried in silence, a truth hidden behind kindness. And as he began that journey, his mother's voice rang once more in his mind. "The world often forgets who builds the ladder, but the one who climbs must always remember." In the days that followed, Sundar couldn't focus. He returned to California, sat in meetings, gave presentations, shook hands with leaders of the world. But inside, something kept tugging at him like a quiet question that refused to disappear. Who gave me the chance? He had always believed it was the university that granted him the scholarship. He had written thank you emails, shared gratitude in speeches, and told students around the world how hard work opened doors. But now, he wasn't sure. Now he wondered, was there someone else? Someone who made a silent choice that changed everything. Late one night, Sundar sat alone in his office. The city lights of San Francisco sparkled outside the glass walls. His desk was covered in old letters and printed emails from years ago. He had asked his team to search archives, to contact the university's finance department, but all he got was the same message again and again. "We cannot locate the original sponsor record. It may have been private or anonymous." Anonymous. That word felt heavier than usual. He leaned back in his chair and looked at an old photo of his family back in Chennai, his father with oil on his hands, his mother holding a steel tumbler, and a young boy with wide eyes. That boy never knew how close he came to losing it all. The next day, Sundar made a call. He dialed a number he hadn't used in years, a retired professor from his graduate program. "Professor Nolan?" he asked. "Gently, Sundar." "Well, this is a surprise," the old man said, his voice full of warmth. "I need to ask something, and it may sound strange," Sundar replied. After a moment of silence, he asked, "Do you remember who helped fund my admission?" The professor chuckled. "You were one of our brightest," he said. "But yes, I remember there was a bit of noise about your case. Your admission was approved, but your funding was uncertain. Then, one morning, it was solved. Just like that. Do you know who solved it?" Sundar pressed. The professor paused. "I was never told," he said, "but I always believed it came from outside the university. It wasn't on any official record. Just a note in the file, covered. No questions." Sundar leaned forward, eyes wide. "Do you have the file?" "I shouldn't," the professor said, "but I might." The call ended, And hours later, an envelope arrived by courier. Inside was a faded folder with Sundar's name. Most of it was standard squares, essays, letters, but on the last page, there was something strange. A handwritten note in blue ink. It said only one thing: "This boy is India's future. Let him rise." No name, no signature, no date, just those words. Sundar stared at the paper, his heart racing. Someone believed in him before the world did. Someone saw what he would become, not what he was, and they never asked for thanks. He looked at the handwriting. It was neat, slanted slightly to the left, familiar, almost like, no, it couldn't be. A memory surfaced. One afternoon, when he was 12, he had returned from school crying. His science teacher had scolded him for asking too many questions. He thought he would be punished at home. Instead, his mother took his hand, pulled out a notebook, and wrote something on the last page. "Never stop asking," she wrote. "Your questions are your wings." The handwriting, it was the same. He rushed to his suitcase, opened an old diary from his teenage years, and flipped to the back. There it was, her writing, the same slant, the same rhythm. His hands trembled. Was it her? Had his own mother done this, and never told him? He called her instantly. "Amma," he said, his voice shaky. "Was it you?" Lakshmi was quiet on the other end. "You wrote that letter, didn't you?" Another pause, then she whispered, "Yes." Sundar couldn't speak. He could only listen. "I didn't want you to know," she said. "I wanted you to believe the world opened the door. Not your mother." "But how?" he asked. "You said we didn't have the money." Lakshmi sighed. "I didn't, but I borrowed. I stitched for 15 families. I walked door to door, asking for work. I didn't tell your father, because he would have said no. I sent the money through someone who worked at the bank. It was not 20,000. It was only enough to prove you were serious. The rest came later." "Why hide it?" Sundar asked again, tears forming in his eyes. "Because, if you thought someone helped you," she said, "you would be grateful. But if you knew it was me, you might feel guilty. And I never wanted that. I just wanted you to fly." He sat in silence, overwhelmed. His entire story, the one the world admired, had always included her. He just didn't see it. "Amma," he said softly, "you didn't just give birth to me, you gave me the world." And she smiled, far away, across the oceans. But as the call ended, Sundar looked at the note again, and something didn't add up, because the handwriting was the same, but the paper was not. This paper was not from their house. It was letterhead, and on the back, in faded ink, it said, "Office of the Prime Minister, New Delhi." Sundar stared. He turned the paper over again. Now he was truly confused. His mother wrote the words, but someone else placed them on official paper. Someone in power. Someone who had helped carry those words into action. And in that moment, Sundar realized his success was not the result of one hand. It was the quiet work of many, and one of them might have been Narendra Modi. Sundar could not sleep that night. The note in his hand felt heavier than 1,000 documents. It was old, folded with care, but what it revealed was something that shook his entire understanding of the past. His mother had written the words, but someone else had taken those words, placed them on Prime Minister letterhead, and moved mountains. Someone who believed in quiet power. Someone who gave without needing to be seen. He needed to know who. Early the next morning, he made a decision. He called the Indian embassy and requested a direct conversation with the Prime Minister, not for media, not for public honor, just one private meeting. 2 days later, Sundar stepped once again into the official residence in New Delhi. This time, he came alone. Modi greeted him with calm eyes and folded hands. He had aged more since their last meeting, but the strength in his voice remained steady. "Welcome," he said simply. "Come, let us talk like two sons of India." They sat in a quiet room with no cameras, no guards, just 2 cups of tea on a wooden table. Sundar placed the letter on the table. "Sir," he said slowly, "my mother wrote this." Modi nodded without surprise. Double quotes. "Yes," he said. "I know." Sundar blinked. "You knew?" Modi leaned forward. "Not at first," he said, "but let me tell you a story." His voice lowered, not with drama, but with memory. "Many years ago," Modi began, "I was not prime minister. I was still a young leader, visiting villages, listening to farmers, meeting teachers. One day, I arrived in a small town in Tamil Nadu. I remember the heat, the dust, and the long walk through narrow lanes. I visited a local school. They had no computers, but they had students with fire in their eyes." He paused, eyes distant. "There was a woman waiting outside the school. She wore a simple cotton sari, sweat on her forehead, but strength in her voice. She came to me with a notebook in her hand. In it were numbers, circuits, drawings of wires and machines." Modi's hand gently touched the table. She said, "My son is different. He asks questions no one can answer. He takes broken radios and gives them life. He reads old newspapers and teaches himself science. Please, don't let him be forgotten." Sundar's heart pounded. Modi looked him in the eyes. "That woman was your mother." Sundar could not believe it. "I remember her," Modi continued. "She did not ask for money. She did not cry. She only said he will not ask for help. So I must." And then she placed a paper in my hand. On it were the same words that now lie before us. "This boy is India's future. Let him rise." Sundar sat frozen, his mind racing through memories, trying to fit this missing piece into the puzzle of his life. "I was moved by her," Modi said. "And years later, when I became prime minister, I found the note again, in a file buried deep in my old papers. And I remembered that woman's eyes. So I reached out quietly, through a program that allowed us to support international scholars. No one asked questions. I made sure of that." He leaned back. "Your mother wrote the truth. I just helped deliver it." Tears welled in Sundar's eyes. All his life, he believed he had climbed the ladder alone. Now he saw the hands beneath it, his mother's, and another's. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Sundar whispered. Modi smiled gently. "Because you needed to walk your path without the weight of gratitude. Because the best help is the kind that doesn't stand in front of you, it stands behind you." There was silence in the room, not the silence of awkwardness, but the silence that follows truth. Deep, peaceful, humbling. "Sir," Sundar said quietly, "what made you believe in me? I was just a boy from Chennai." Modi looked at him carefully. "Because," he said, "I was once a boy from Vadanagar. I sold tea at a railway station. People looked at me and saw a servant. But one teacher looked at me and saw a leader. That one belief changed my life." He placed his hand over the letter. "We rise because someone believes in us, and we grow when we believe in others." Sundar stood up and bowed his head. He didn't need a thank you speech. He didn't need a press release. He just needed this moment. As he walked out of the office, he called his mother Amma. He said, "I met the man who heard your voice." Lakshmi was quiet on the phone. "And now?" she asked. "Now," Sundar said, "I must become the voice for someone else." The next day, Sundar announced something unexpected, a scholarship fund. But not just for top scorers or city students. It was for the dreamers in silence, for the children in dusty villages with questions too big for their classrooms, for the sons and daughters of quiet mothers who stitch hope into their children's futures. He called it the Lakshmi Initiative, and he made one promise. No child who dreams should ever be told, "It's not possible." The news spread, but Sundar gave no long interviews. He let the work speak. A week later, a letter arrived at Lakshmi Pichai's doorstep. It had no stamp, no sender's name. Inside was one line. You were right. He rose. 2 years passed. The Lakshmi initiative grew quietly, but powerfully. It did not make headlines every day. It did not throw grand parties or put faces on billboards. Instead, it listened to whispers from corners of the country most people never noticed. A small girl in Manipur who built a windmill from broken plastic. A teenager in Bihar who hacked together a mobile app from a borrowed phone. A boy in Kerala who repaired a water pump in his village using nothing but recycled parts and instinct. They were not chosen because they were perfect. They were chosen because they refused to stop. Each of them received a call one morning. It was brief, polite, and impossible to forget. You have been selected by the Lakshmi Initiative. Pack your things. Someone believes in you. The program flew them to Bangalore, to a quiet campus surrounded by trees. There were no logos, no golden gates, just mentors, tools, and time. This is where they met. Arun, aged 16, from a fishing village in Tamil Nadu. His father had lost both legs in an accident, and Arun had been supporting the family since he was 9. He built drones from scrap, using them to map flooded fields and rescue animals during storms. Zoya, aged 15, from Kashmir. Her brother was taken during a raid years ago, and her village never recovered. She used old camera lenses to build telescopes. She said the stars made her feel less alone. And then there was Omkar, aged 17, from a mining town in Jharkhand. He never finished high school. Instead, he repaired circuits in underground tunnels by watching YouTube videos. Once, he fixed a generator with a spoon and a shoelace. These 3 had nothing in common, except for one thing. They carried silence inside them, the kind that grows from watching the world turn its face away. But here, at the campus, they bloomed. They worked together. They fought. They failed. They laughed. They built things that no one expected. And they became friends. Until one evening, something changed. A letter arrived. It was addressed to all 3. It said only this: You will present your project in California, at the Global Summit for Innovators, and you will meet the man whose mother believed in you before anyone else did. None of them had ever left India. None of them had ever flown in a plane, but within days, they stood on American soil, staring up at the glass towers of Silicon Valley. Their project was simple, but powerful. They had built a modular energy kit that could bring electricity to a village using discarded solar cells, bicycle parts, and basic software. It cost less than a single textbook. It could run for years. The night before the summit, they stood together, nervous. What if we fail? Arun asked. Zoya looked at the sky. What if we don't? Omkar didn't say anything. He just placed his hand on the table and whispered, We are already here. The next morning, the hall was full. Hundreds of people from around the world had gathered to hear from top minds, Nobel winners, CEOs, astronauts. And then, 3 teenagers from India walked onto the stage. No one clapped at first. They didn't look like inventors. They didn't speak perfect English. They didn't wear suits, but when they began to explain what they had made, how they had lived, struggled, and still created hope, the silence turned into something sacred. And when they finished, the room exploded. Sundar Pichai, seated in the front row, did not clap right away. He stood up, walked to the stage, and looked each of them in the eyes. You remind me of someone, he said. You remind me of the boy I used to be. The crowd was quiet. Sundar turned to the audience. But more importantly, he said, You remind me of my mother. He then reached into his pocket and took out a small letter, folded with care. This was the first note that gave me a future. The words on it were written by a woman no one knew. Now, because of her, the world knows you. He handed the letter to Arun, who read it silently. This boy is India's future. Let him rise. Zoya began to cry. Omkar held her hand, and for a moment, There were no leaders and no students. There were only people connected by courage, by quiet kindness, by belief. Later that evening, as the three sat on a bench under the golden sky of California, a man approached them. He wore simple clothes, a gray beard, and tired eyes. "Do you know who you really are?" he asked. Arun smiled. "Just kids who tried." The man nodded slowly. "And yet, you carry a storm inside you. Use it, because storms don't destroy, they clear the sky." Then he walked away. None of them ever found out who he was, but the next day, Zoya received a message on her old phone. No name, just one line. "You were right." They rose. A year had passed since the summit. The world had changed a little, not because of technology, not because of war or peace treaties, but because of three teenagers who showed that dreams could be built from broken pieces. Arun now led a team in Tamil Nadu that used their invention to restore light to 27 villages. Zoya returned to Kashmir, where she opened a school under the stars, one where no child had to feel alone again. Omkar built a lab inside an abandoned rail station. Every Sunday, children from nearby towns came to learn how to make machines with their hands and hearts. None of them asked for fame. None of them wanted reward. But their names had become something more powerful than famous. They had become hope back. In California, Sundar stood inside a quiet auditorium. It was the annual Global Summit for Youth, and this year, he was not the speaker. He was the listener. Lakshmi Pichai sat beside him, wrapped in her favorite cotton shawl. Her eyes watched gently as Arun stepped up to the stage, holding the same letter Sundar once received. "I want to begin," Arun said, "not with data, not with graphs, but with something small." He unfolded the paper. "This boy is in the future. Let him rise." He looked at Sundar. That boy rose, and because he rose, he reached for us. And now, we rise. The crowd stood in silence, hearts full. But it was what happened after the speech that no one forgot. As the lights dimmed and the audience prepared to leave, Sundar walked back onto the stage, holding a small book. He opened it slowly and began to speak. "This is my mother's diary," he said. "In it, I found not just words, but seeds. Seeds that became the life I live today." He turned the pages. Here she wrote about nights without food, days without rest, and the fear that I might never become more than a number in a long line of forgotten names. He looked at her, and she gave him a gentle nod. "But she also wrote something else," he said. He held up the diary and read, "If you ever become someone the world listens to, do not raise your voice, raise others." His voice shook slightly. "I have tried to do that. But today, I want to do one more thing." He turned to the crowd. "There is a question that has followed me for years, and I want to ask it here, in front of you all, while my mother is beside me." Lakshmi turned to him, surprised. Sundar continued, double quotes, "AMMA, he said, you gave me everything, even when you had nothing. You believed in me when the world had not even seen me." He paused, voice trembling. "But why?" Lakshmi's eyes filled with tears. She stood slowly, walked to the microphone, and looked out at the sea of faces, young, old, rich, poor. And then she answered, "Because," she said softly, "you were not mine to keep. You were mine to carry." The room fell silent. She looked at her son. Mother does not give because she is certain. She gives because hope is the only thing stronger than fear. Sundar stepped back. His face was calm, and then he said one final thing. "If I have done anything right in this life, it is because one woman whispered to the wind, and someone far away listened." As he walked off the stage, the audience stood in silence, not cheering, not shouting, just standing. Because they had not just heard a story, they had felt it, a story of belief, built not by chance, but by choices made in quiet, when no one was watching. And somewhere, across the world, in a village without signal or power. A little boy sat under the stars, fixing a broken torch, and above him, the sky listened. It was meant to be over. The applause had faded. The lights were dimmed. The story had been told. But sometimes, when you think a chapter is closed, life turns one more page. 3 months after the summit, Sundar stood on a hill in Chennai, not far from where he grew up. Behind him, his mother watched quietly. In front of them, workers moved across a large piece of land, pouring foundations, lifting beams, planting trees. It was the ground where the Lakshmi Foundation Center would be built. Not a school, not a tech park, something in between. A place for forgotten talent, for village girls who rebuilt radios, for street boys who drew engines in the dirt, for mothers who taught math by counting rice grains. It was his mother's idea. They don't need another building, she had said. They need someone to listen. Sundar had agreed, but just as the first brick was placed into the earth, a phone call came. Sir, the voice said, there's a girl in Rajasthan. She made something you need to see. Sundar didn't ask questions. He flew there the next day. The village was small, hidden among dry hills and dusty wind, and in a corner of that village, an 11-year-old girl named Meera had built a machine. Using an old bicycle, a fan motor, and pieces of metal she collected from garbage. It cooled rooms. It ran without electricity. It made no noise. And it worked. Meera stood beside the device shyly. Her hair was messy. Her hands were rough. Her eyes were sharp. Where did you learn this? Sundar asked, kneeling down. I didn't, she said. I watched my mother faint during summer, so I built something to keep her cool. Sundar smiled gently. What do you want to become? Meera didn't pause. Someone who makes things better. He stood up and turned to his team. Bring her, he said. Not tomorrow. Now. That evening, as they sat under a tree near the village, Meera looked at him and asked, Is it true your mother helped you when no one else did? He nodded. Meera looked thoughtful. Then maybe, she said, we all need someone who doesn't give up on us. Sundar smiled. Yes, he said. And maybe we all need to be that someone for someone else. He gave her a notebook, the same kind his mother used to write in. Start writing down your ideas, he told her. One day, someone will read them and thank you. But Meera shook her head. I don't need thanks, she said. What do you need? He asked. She looked at the stars. I need someone to believe that I'm not small. And Sundar felt something shift inside him again, because once, a woman in a sari stood outside a school, with a notebook in her hand, saying almost the same thing, and now, a girl from Rajasthan had picked up the thread. The story wasn't over. It never would be. Because stories like this don't end. They grow. They pass from one heart to another, from mother to son, from leader to child, from a whisper to a roar.